Good evening, and welcome back to Haunted Tales. Tonight we journey deep into the Appalachian Mountains, an ancient land cloaked in mist, where beauty hides something far more sinister. These trails may look like a hiker's paradise, but beneath the ridges and winding paths lurk predators both human and otherworldly. In the silence of the woods, stalkers hunt in the dark, apparitions rise from forgotten eras, and hikers stumble into encounters so disturbing they're left questioning their own sanity. The 10 stories you're about to hear are not campfire legends. They are true accounts of terror in the wilderness, and they prove that no matter how prepared you are on these trails, you are never truly alone. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It might just make this experience even more unsettling. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Haunted Tales and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what waits in the shadows. Now, take a deep breath and step into the darkness with me. Blood Mountain rises out of the Chattahoochee National Forest like a dark sentinel, its ridges carved by time and memory. At 4,459 feet, it is the highest peak along the Georgia stretch of the Appalachian Trail, a place both revered and feared by those who wander its slopes. To most hikers, the mountain is known for its panoramic views and the stone shelter that crowns its summit. But to locals, and to the Cherokee and Creek peoples who came long before, the name carries an older, heavier meaning. The Cherokee told stories of an ancient battle fought here, a war so bloody that rivers ran red for days, staining the soil forever. They believed the spirits of the fallen lingered, restless and bound to the ridges. The Creek people whispered that the mountain was a place where the living and the dead could cross paths, a threshold. The settlers who came after added their own tales of strange lights, eerie voices, and hunters who never returned from its woods. Over centuries, the mountain gathered layers of folklore like fog curling around its slopes. On the evening of October 12, 2002, Daniel Hart and his girlfriend, Emily Rhodes, set out to hike that very mountain. They were both college students from Athens, Georgia, seasoned hikers who had already completed several sections of the Appalachian Trail. Daniel, 24, was an outdoor enthusiast who carried a journal everywhere he went. Emily, 22, was quieter, more reserved, but she trusted Daniel's experience. Together they planned a simple overnight trip, ascend via the Byron Reese Trail, connect to the Appalachian Trail, and camp at the summit shelter before hiking back down the next morning. The air that day was crisp, the kind of autumn coolness that hinted of frost. Leaves burned in shades of orange, crimson, and gold, carpeting the trail beneath their boots. Other hikers remembered passing them, Daniel animated, pointing out ridgelines on the horizon, Emily smiling but cautious as the sun lowered behind the trees. At 7:15 p.m., they signed into the trail log at Neal's Gap, their names written neatly in black ink. That was the last confirmed sighting of them together. The climb grew harder as the light faded. Shadows pooled in the hollows of the trail, and the forest seemed to thicken with silence. When they reached the Blood Mountain shelter, it was already near dark. The shelter itself was an austere structure, rough stone walls, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It had no electricity, no comfort, just a stone chamber that smelled of damp earth and old smoke. Daniel unrolled their sleeping bags, lit a small lantern, and began writing in his journal. Emily later recalled how the stone walls seemed to hold sound strangely, amplifying the smallest noises until even the rustle of her pack echoed like whispers. It was sometime after 10 p.m. when they first heard it, a scraping sound. It came from outside, circling slowly around the shelter, not the rustle of an animal in leaves, not the shifting of branches in the wind. This was deliberate, a sharp metallic scrape like steel dragged against stone. Daniel assumed it was a bear, though even as he said the words, his voice faltered. Emily felt her stomach knot. She shone her flashlight out the doorway, but the beam dissolved into the fog that had crept up the mountain. Nothing moved. The forest had gone utterly still. An hour passed. The scraping came again, louder, closer. This time Emily swore she saw something through the mist, a figure, tall, too thin. Its limbs held stiff and unnatural, as though it were swaying but not moving. When Daniel shouted, the shape melted into the fog, leaving only silence. They decided to leave, Packing quickly, they switched on their headlamps and started down the trail. The descent was treacherous in the dark, the fog swallowing their beams so that they could see only a few feet ahead. Emily described the air as heavy, almost suffocating, carrying with it a strange coppery tang that made her gag, as though the forest itself smelled faintly of blood. Half an hour into their descent, the footsteps began. At first, faint, a shuffle behind them, matching their pace. Then louder, stopping when they stopped, moving when they moved. Daniel turned, his light flashing wildly through the mist. "Hello?" He shouted, his voice cracking. No answer. Only the crunch of unseen steps circling closer. Panic set in. Emily clutched Daniel's hand and they hurried faster. The forest seemed to press in on them, branches snagging their clothes, roots clawing at their boots. The sounds followed relentlessly. At one point, Daniel whirled around, and Emily remembered seeing his flashlight illuminate something pale between the trees. A face, maybe, gaunt, eyes too wide, unblinking, and then the light flickered, and it was gone. Emily's memory fractured after that. She recalled Daniel's breath, ragged with fear. She recalled his scream, a guttural, tearing cry that echoed down the mountain. She remembered the sound of something heavy crashing into the underbrush, then silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. Her own headlamp sputtered out. In total darkness, she stumbled forward, slashing her arms and legs on branches, falling onto rocks, but she did not dare stop. She ran blindly until at last, faint lights appeared through the fog. Neil's Gap, civilization. At dawn, Emily staggered into the ranger station, bloodied and trembling. Witnesses described her as ashen, almost lifeless. It took hours before she could whisper the words. It took him. Search parties were deployed immediately. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, and dogs combed the mountain. They found Daniel's backpack slashed open, his journal pages scattered like leaves, his flashlight cracked but still glowing faintly. His sleeping bag had been shredded into ribbons, but Daniel himself had vanished. There were drag marks in the soil, long, violent gouges that ended abruptly on a patch of bare rock. Beyond that point, no tracks, no sign of a body. It was as though he had been lifted straight from the earth. Emily was questioned extensively. Police suspected foul play, but her wounds were shallow, defensive, consistent with someone fleeing through the forest. No charges were ever filed. She withdrew from public life, dropped out of college, and moved away from Georgia. Friends said she was plagued by night terrors, waking up screaming that it was still out there. The case might have been dismissed as tragedy if not for the mountain's history. In 1999, just 3 years earlier, a man named Michael Turner vanished on the same trail. His belongings were found inside the shelter, but he never returned. In the 1950s, hunters spoke of being stalked at night by a man-shaped figure that stayed just beyond their lantern light. Even civilian Conservation Corps workers who built the shelter in the 1930s claimed they often felt watched and would find deep gouges carved into the stone walls overnight. In modern times, hikers continue to report eerie phenomena. Some describe scratching sounds on the shelter walls as they try to sleep. Others wake to the sensation of footsteps pacing outside, circling in the dark. A few claim to have seen a gaunt silhouette in the fog, standing motionless until the beam of a flashlight reveals nothing at all. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy lists Daniel Hart as missing, presumed deceased, but locals whisper that Blood Mountain keeps what it claims. They say the fog is its veil, hiding what stalks its slopes. And when hikers vanish, they don't leave the mountain. They become part of it. Daniel Hart's body has never been recovered. His journal, recovered from the trail, contained a final unfinished line written the night he disappeared. Something is scratching at the walls. It doesn't feel like an animal. It feels like it wants in. To this day, hikers pause at the Blood Mountain shelter and read his words, etched in faded ink. Some stay the night, daring the silence. Others hurry past, unwilling to linger in a place where the line between the living and the dead feels perilously thin. Blood Mountain remains a destination of beauty, its vistas unmatched, its history rich. But beneath its charm lies something darker, a presence whispered of for centuries, a shadow that walks in fog. And if you ever find yourself there, alone in the night, and hear footsteps following your own, remember Daniel Hart, remember the stories, and ask yourself whether the mountain is walking with you, or whether something far older is waiting for you to stop. Roan Mountain lies where North Carolina and Tennessee meet, its balds sweeping open to the sky, its ridges rolling like waves of dark green sea. At over 6,200 feet, the massif is one of the most celebrated stretches of the Appalachian Trail. By day, hikers speak of the stunning rhododendron gardens, where endless pink blossoms ignite the mountain each June. By night, however, the mountain takes on a different character, vast, windswept, and eerily exposed. The fog rolls in so thick it swallows the path whole. Shadows stretch where there should be none, and the wind carries voices that vanish before you can place them. Local legend insists that Roan Mountain has always been haunted. The Cherokee believed the balds were cursed places where spirits walked freely. Early settlers reported strange lights bobbing across the ridges, lanterns that vanished when approached. And during the Civil War, the mountain became a deadly hiding place. Soldiers who deserted into the balds often never returned, their bodies discovered months later, pale and frozen, with no wounds to explain their deaths. The most enduring mystery, though, centers on one disappearance. It occurred in June 1973, and it remains one of the most unnerving cases in Appalachian hiking history. That summer, a group of 6 hikers from Knoxville, 4 men and 2 women, all in their early 20s, set out to backpack across the Roan Highlands. The group was close-knit, college friends who spent every summer tackling new sections of the trail. Their leader was Mark Feldman, 23, a charismatic outdoorsman known for his confidence and good humor. With him were his girlfriend, Laura, and their friends, Greg, Susan, Tom, and a quieter man named Richard Hale. The group began their hike from Carver's Gap, following the Appalachian Trail northward across the balds. It was early afternoon, the sky hazy but clear. Other hikers saw them laughing and taking photographs, their spirits high as they ascended the wide, grassy ridges. Nothing seemed amiss, but that night, everything changed. The group camped near the Roan High Knob Shelter, a log structure tucked into the woods. As evening fell, fog rolled in from the balds, swallowing the ridgeline. Laura later described how the mist seemed to move like it was alive, twisting and curling around the trees. The group ate, shared stories, and tried to ignore the chill that had crept into the summer air. Around midnight, Greg awoke to voices outside the shelter. At first he thought it was other hikers arriving late, but the voices were wrong. They were hushed, muttering, overlapping like dozens of whispers all at once. He strained to listen, but the words were indecipherable. When he nudged Mark awake, the voices stopped instantly, replaced by silence so complete it was suffocating. The group brushed it off as the wind, but unease settled in. They left the shelter at dawn, choosing to continue north. The fog never lifted. By afternoon, visibility had shrunk to only a few feet. The trail seemed to shift beneath them, landmarks vanishing into white. Laura later said it felt as though the mountain was folding in on itself, twisting directions, turning the familiar into something alien. It was then that Richard began to act strangely. Normally quiet but dependable, he started lagging behind, staring into the mist as though he saw something no one else could. "Did you hear that?" he asked repeatedly. When the others pressed, he would shake his head, muttering, "Never mind. It's nothing." By evening, the group reached Grassy Ridge Bald, a wide plateau of open land. The fog pressed low, flattening the world into gray. They decided to camp there, despite the exposure. As they set up tents, Richard wandered off toward the ridge. Laura recalled calling after him, but he didn't respond. His silhouette disappeared into the mist, and within seconds, he was gone. At first, they assumed he'd return. Mark searched the immediate area with a flashlight, shouting his name into the fog. Nothing. They stayed awake most of the night, waiting for Richard to reappear. But he never did. At dawn, panic set in. The group spread out, scouring the ridge, calling until their voices cracked. No footprints remained on the dew-slick grass, no broken branches to show his path. It was as though the fog had swallowed him whole. By midday, exhausted and terrified, the hikers descended to Carver's Gap and reported the disappearance. Search and rescue teams mobilized instantly. For 6 days, over 100 volunteers combed the Roan Highlands. Helicopters swept low across the balds. Dogs tracked the ridges. Nothing. No clothing. No gear. No body. The official search was called off after a week. Richard Hale was declared missing, presumed dead. But the group's accounts continued to trouble investigators. They insisted Richard had not been suicidal. had no reason to vanish. And then there were the voices. Greg finally admitted that on the second night, just hours before Richard disappeared, he had woken again to the whispering outside their tents. This time he swore he heard Richard's voice among them, not speaking clearly, but repeating his own name over and over, in a tone that wasn't quite his. Months later, hikers passing through the same bald reported hearing something uncanny. At night, in the fog, they described whispers that circled their tents. Some claimed they heard a man calling from the ridge, "Help me. Please help me." But when they followed the voice, they found only mist and silence. Over the years, the legend deepened. Rangers admitted that the area around Grassy Ridge has seen more than its share of disappearances. Hikers vanish, only to be found days later in places far from where they were last seen, their gear intact, their faces frozen in terror. Some are never found at all. One ranger, speaking anonymously, described a personal encounter. In 1989, while patrolling near the summit, he heard someone walking behind him, heavy boots crunching the grass in rhythm with his own. But when he turned, no one was there. The sound continued for nearly half a mile before fading into the wind. Locals whisper that the fog itself is alive, that it carries voices from another world. They say the Balds of Roan are a thin place, where the barrier between the living and the dead grows fragile. Richard Hale's story is often cited as proof. A man who stepped into the fog and never returned, his voice still echoing across the ridges. Today, hikers still camp on Grassy Ridge Bald, lulled by the beauty of its sweeping views. But some refuse to stay after dark. They say that when the fog creeps low, you can hear footsteps pacing outside your tent, circling. Sometimes a voice calls your name, and if you follow it, you may never come back. Richard Hale's body has never been recovered. His friends carried the weight of that night for the rest of their lives, haunted not only by his absence, but by the feeling that he hadn't simply been lost. He had been taken, and so Roan Mountain keeps its secrets, its balds rolling endlessly beneath the fog. Beautiful by day, sinister by night, a place where voices whisper in the dark, and where one man's disappearance still chills the Appalachian Trail nearly 50 years later. In the vast wilderness of western North Carolina, where the Appalachian Mountains rise in jagged ridges and deep valleys, there lies a place that has whispered its mysteries for centuries. The Linville Gorge Wilderness, sometimes called the Grand Canyon of the East, is home to dense forests, sheer cliffs, and a silence so complete that even the wind seems hesitant to disturb it. But nestled within this rugged terrain is Brown Mountain, a ridge that carries with it one of the most enduring and disturbing mysteries in Appalachian folklore. For generations, hikers, hunters, and locals have reported strange glowing orbs of light dancing above the treetops, vanishing and reappearing without explanation. They're known simply as the Brown Mountain Lights. Some dismiss them as swamp gas or headlights refracted through the valley. Others cling to older explanations, whispered by the Cherokee, who believed the lights were the spirits of warriors searching for their fallen brothers. During the Civil War, locals added another layer, the belief that these were the restless souls of soldiers who never made it home. Yet modern hikers and campers insist the phenomenon is far more sinister, something that doesn't just appear, but watches, follows, and sometimes even lures travelers off the path. One such account, buried in ranger reports from the 1970s and pieced together by local historians, tells of a young man named Andrew Collins. His story remains one of the most disturbing incidents tied to the Brown Mountain Lights, and to this day, the Forest Service treats it with quiet, uneasy silence. Andrew was 24 years old when he set out to hike the Linville Gorge in the summer of 1975. A student from Raleigh, he was fascinated with local folklore and often traveled the Blue Ridge Parkway with his camera and a notebook, documenting stories told in small diners and roadside gas stations. Friends later said he had become fixated on Brown Mountain, scribbling references to ghost fire and lantern bearers in his journal. On July 18th, he drove west with the intention of camping alone for 3 nights, determined to capture photographic proof of the mysterious lights. The first day was uneventful. Rangers remembered him signing the trail log, cheerful and talkative. He asked specific questions about the best overlook to watch the lights, and was advised that Wiseman's View was his safest bet. Instead, Andrew chose a more dangerous route, an overgrown trail that dipped closer to the gorge, known to experienced hikers for its isolation and difficult terrain. By the time the sun had set and the crickets began their chorus, he had pitched his small canvas tent deep in the shadow of Brown Mountain. It was around midnight when Andrew first reported the lights. His journal, later found by search parties, contains shaky handwriting, as if written with trembling hands. 11:57 p.m. Saw 2 orbs above the ridge. Orange-white glow. Moving in slow arcs, like lanterns swinging. No sound, not planes, not headlights, he continued. 12:12 a.m. One light closer now, lower, can see it between the trees. It flickers but not like fire. It pulses. I feel strange, like I'm being watched. The next entry is smudged. Barely legible. 12:37 a.m. It's behind me. That was the last thing he ever wrote. When Andrew failed to return home, his friends contacted the local sheriff. A search party was organized, and within 3 days, his car was found parked neatly at the trailhead. His tent was discovered 1.5 miles into the wilderness. Inside were his belongings, sleeping bag, rations, camera, and the journal. But Andrew himself was gone. Rescuers scoured the gorge for weeks. Dogs picked up faint trails but lost them near the cliffs overlooking the Catawba River. Helicopters circled. Volunteers called out his name, but there was nothing, no body, no trace, not even discarded clothing. Yet many of the rescuers returned with stories that chilled them to the bone. Several reported seeing lights themselves during the nighttime searches. One ranger, whose testimony was quietly recorded in official notes, said, "We thought we saw a lantern waving from the ridgeline, like someone signaling. 3 of us went after it. Every time we got close, it moved further back. Then it vanished completely and the woods went dead silent. No bugs, no wind, just silence." Another rescuer swore he heard footsteps pacing him through the brush at night. "It sounded like someone circling us," he said. But when we turned our flashlights, there was nothing. Only trees. Andrew's case was never solved. He was officially listed as missing, presumed dead. But locals whispered that the mountain had claimed him, that the lights weren't just natural phenomena, they were hunters. Over the years, more hikers came forward with disturbing encounters. In 1982, a couple camping along the gorge reported being woken at 2 a.m. by a glow outside their tent. The husband unzipped the flap and claimed to see a pale sphere hovering less than 50 feet away. It made no sound, but the air around them grew thick and oppressive, as if the oxygen had been sucked away. When he reached for his flashlight, the orb darted behind a tree. Moments later, it reappeared on the opposite side, closer this time. The couple fled barefoot, abandoning their gear. When rangers later inspected the site, they found the tent collapsed and the ground around it scorched in a perfect circle. A decade later, in 1993, a group of college students hiking the trail described seeing not just one, but dozens of lights hovering above the gorge, weaving in and out of the tree line. They assumed it was some sort of prank or experimental aircraft, until one of the lights broke away from the cluster and followed them for nearly half a mile. Their testimony matches others. The silence, the feeling of being stalked, the sudden bursts of static on radios. None of them ever returned to Brown Mountain. Even law enforcement hasn't been spared. In 2001, a highway patrol officer parked along the Blue Ridge Parkway reported a glowing sphere crossing the road in front of him. It moved slowly, deliberately, before vanishing into the woods. "It wasn't a reflection," he said. "It cast shadows. It lit up my dashboard. I've never seen anything like it, and I don't care to again." Skeptics argue that the Brown Mountain lights are nothing more than distant car headlights refracting through the valley, or marsh gas igniting under the right conditions. But those explanations fail to account for the reports of close encounters, the heat, the silence, the burned patches of ground. They don't explain Andrew Collins' disappearance, or the dozens of hikers who swear the lights responded to their movements, as if intelligent. The Cherokee once said the lights were spirits of maidens searching for their lost warriors, wandering the ridges eternally with torches in hand. Civil War folklore insists they're soldiers marching with ghostly lanterns forever looking for their regiments. But for modern hikers, one truth remains constant. Once you've seen the Brown Mountain lights, you never forget the way they make you feel. There is an unease, a primal dread that comes not from what you see, but from what you can't explain. The sensation that the wilderness is alive, that the shadows between the trees are watching, and that perhaps, just perhaps, the lights aren't trying to reveal themselves, but to lure you deeper, where no one will ever find you again. And if you stand on Wiseman's View on a still night, overlooking the gorge, you might just see them yourself. Pale orbs rising from the treetops, flickering like lanterns, drifting with a purpose only they understand. Some vanish quickly, others hover, waiting, as if deciding whether you're the next hiker they'll follow into the endless dark. Andrew's journal still rests in the archives of the Burke County Historical Society. Its final words remain smudged but chillingly clear. It's behind me. And to this day, when the rangers are asked about Brown Mountain, they offer the same uneasy advice. If you see the lights, don't follow them. And whatever you do, don't let them follow you. High atop the Allegheny Plateau in West Virginia lies a landscape unlike any other in Appalachia. Dolly Sod's wilderness is a place of windswept meadows, stunted red spruce, and bogs that stretch like scars across the land. From a distance, it appears serene, almost beautiful, an alpine plateau with wide-open skies. But those who know it well whisper a different truth. Dolly Sod's is a place of sudden fogs, disorienting terrain, and stories of hikers who step off the trail and are never seen again. Some blame the treacherous bogs that swallow the careless. Others insist there's something older, more sinister, lurking in the mists. The Seneca, who once hunted these ridges, avoided Dolly Sod's whenever they could. They spoke of the land where the sky eats the earth, a place where spirits drifted in the fog, luring the unwary into the marshes. Settlers later added their own superstitions. They said the winds carried voices, that the bogs could pull a man under as though hungry, and that lights sometimes moved through the trees at night, lanterns with no bearer. In modern times, Dolly Sod's has been the site of numerous disappearances. The wilderness is unforgiving. 47 miles of rugged trails, sudden weather changes, and few landmarks. Rangers warn hikers to carry compasses, not just GPS devices, because storms and fog can scramble signals. But some vanish without leaving even a boot print. Among those stories, none is more unsettling than the case of Matthew Green, a 31-year-old hiker from Pennsylvania who entered Dolly Sod's in October of 1997 and never returned. His case has become legend among locals, not only for the mystery of his disappearance, but for the disturbing details that surfaced during the search. Matthew was a seasoned outdoorsman. Friends described him as cautious, meticulous, the type to triple-check his maps and gear. He had hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail and spent most weekends exploring the Blue Ridge. Dolly Sod's was new to him, but he had read about its unique ecosystem and wanted to photograph the fall foliage. He told his parents he'd be gone 3 days, parking his car at the Laneville trailhead before setting out with his backpack and camera. The first day went as planned. Other hikers remembered passing him near the Red Creek Trail, cheerful and polite. He asked questions about the forks leading deeper into the plateau, noting landmarks with a compass. But by the second day, the weather turned. Dolly Sod's is infamous for its sudden fogs, and that afternoon, a thick mist rolled in, cutting visibility to mere feet. It lingered into the evening, so dense that hikers reported losing sight of their own boots. Matthew's journal, later recovered from his abandoned tent, describes what happened next. His handwriting grows shaky, the lines uneven. 5:40 p.m., fog rolling in fast. Can't see more than 10 yards, compass still works. Heading east. A few pages later, 7:10 p.m., something odd. Heard footsteps behind me, turned, nothing there. Fog plays tricks. Then the final entry, 8:02 p.m., voices in the fog. Not English, too close. After that, the pages are blank. When Matthew didn't return home, his parents alerted authorities. Search and rescue teams scoured Dolly Sod's for nearly 2 weeks. They found his tent pitched near a bog, his journal inside, along with most of his gear. But there was no sign of him. The ground near the tent was undisturbed, no tracks, no sign of struggle. It was as if he had simply walked into the fog and vanished. Rangers interviewed other hikers who had been in the wilderness during those days. Several mentioned hearing strange things. One couple swore they heard voices drifting through the mist around midnight. Distant but distinct, as if a group was moving through the fog without flashlights. Another hiker reported seeing a pale figure just beyond the tree line, standing perfectly still. When he approached, it dissolved into the mist. The most unsettling testimony came from a volunteer searcher who claimed that, during the 4th night of the search, He awoke in his tent to see a dim glow outside. At first he thought it was another rescuer's lantern. But when he stepped out, the light receded into the fog. He followed it for several yards before realizing he was moving away from camp. The glow pulsed once, twice, and then vanished completely, leaving him in absolute darkness. He described a moment of panic, convinced that something had been leading him astray. Matthew's body was never recovered. His disappearance remains unsolved. Some argue he became lost in the fog and stumbled into one of the bogs, his body swallowed by the marsh. Others suggest he fell into the gorge or was caught by sudden hypothermia. But the journal entries complicate that theory. Why would an experienced hiker hallucinate footsteps and voices? Why would he note them so urgently, so clearly, only hours before disappearing? Over the years, more hikers have vanished in Dolly Sods. In 2006, a teenage boy became separated from his group during a sudden fog bank. He was found the next morning, barefoot and shivering, less than half a mile from camp. When asked what happened, he claimed he had followed a woman's voice, calling his name through the mist. He insisted she was ahead of him, always just out of sight, but when he finally stopped, the voice stopped too. Rangers chalked it up to stress and disorientation. His parents weren't so sure. In 2012, 2 men hiking near Breathed Mountain reported seeing lights weaving between the trees at dusk. They assumed other campers were approaching until the lights rose above the treetops and moved silently into the fog. One of the men snapped a photo on his phone, but the image only shows a vague blur of white. And in 2018, another hiker, a woman from Virginia, returned from Dolly Sods with a chilling story. She had camped alone, but around midnight heard voices surrounding her tent. They weren't speaking English. She described them as low, guttural, almost chanting. When she finally built up the courage to unzip the tent, the voices ceased. The fog was so dense she could barely see her hand in front of her face. She left at dawn, abandoning half her supplies. Skeptics, as always, point to natural explanations. Fog distorts sound, they argue, carrying voices from miles away. Stress and exhaustion create auditory hallucinations. Lights could be distant campfires or even military flares from training exercises nearby. But none of these explanations account for the journal entries, the repeated testimonies, or the fact that Dolly Sods has claimed far more hikers than statistics would suggest. Locals cling to older beliefs. They say the fog isn't natural, it's alive, that it carries with it spirits older than the mountains themselves. The Seneca warned of this, insisting that voices in the mist belong to the dead, luring the living into the bogs. Settlers added that lantern lights were witch fires, meant to guide wanderers off safe trails and into the marsh. Even rangers tread carefully in Dolly Sods. Though they rarely admit it publicly, many avoid night patrols, especially when the fog rolls in. One retired ranger told a journalist off record, "You hear things out there. Sometimes you swear it's a whole crowd moving just beyond sight. Then it's gone. We joke about it, but deep down, we don't like talking about Dolly Sods at night." Today, Dolly Sods remains a popular hiking destination. The wilderness draws photographers, birdwatchers, and campers seeking solitude. But the warnings are clear. Never hike alone, always carry a compass. And if the fog descends, stop moving until it lifts. Because once you step off the trail, the land doesn't give you back so easily. Matthew Green's case remains open, though unofficially, many consider it closed. His parents never stopped searching, returning year after year to walk the trails he loved. In 2003, on the anniversary of his disappearance, his father camped at the site where Matthew's tent was found. At 2 a.m., he reported waking to the sound of footsteps circling his tent. He called out, thinking it was another camper. The footsteps stopped. When he unzipped the flap, there was nothing but fog. His father died in 2010, never knowing what became of his son. To this day, hikers who enter Dolly Sods sometimes leave small offerings near Red Creek: coins, cairns of stone, even photographs. They say it's to honor those who never returned, to appease whatever lingers in the fog. And though most leave unharmed, nearly everyone carries the same memory home: the silence, the suffocating mist, and the uncanny feeling of being watched. If you ever find yourself in Dolly Sods, take heed of the warnings. Don't follow voices in the fog. Don't chase lights into the trees. And if you hear footsteps behind you, resist the urge to turn. Some say that's how it begins, that once you acknowledge the presence in the mist, It never lets you go. For in Dolly Sods, the wilderness isn't empty. It waits. The Roan Highlands straddle the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, a vast spine of the Appalachian Mountains where the peaks roll like waves of stone. At over 6,000 feet, Roan Mountain is notorious for its sudden storms, its heavy fog, and its grassy balds, treeless summits where the wind howls across the earth with a voice all its own. Hikers who travel here often speak of beauty unmatched, but also of an uncanny loneliness that sets in once the trail swallows you. For centuries, Roan has carried with it more than just weather and wilderness. It has carried stories, whispers of a pale woman who appears in the mist, sometimes standing still upon the balds, other times drifting just ahead of weary travelers. Some insist she is a protector, guiding lost hikers back to safety. Others tell a darker story, that those who follow her into the fog are never seen again. The Cherokee had their own tale. They spoke of Yona Unega, the White Bear woman, who roamed the ridges searching for her lost children. To see her, they warned, was to risk being claimed by her grief. Early settlers gave her a simpler name, the Phantom Woman of Roan, and though the legends shift with time, one story remains etched into the memory of the mountain, one that hikers still repeat in hushed tones around their campfires. It is the story of Sarah Miller, a young woman who vanished on Roan Mountain in the summer of 1937. Her disappearance sparked one of the largest search efforts in Carter County history, and the events surrounding it have never been fully explained. Sarah was 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Johnson City, Tennessee. Friends described her as adventurous, fond of poetry and mountain walks. On June 12th, she joined a church outing to the Roan Balds, where dozens of young men and women hiked, picnicked, and sang hymns on the open meadows. Witnesses remembered Sarah wandering a bit farther than the others, notebook in hand, scribbling lines as the clouds thickened. That afternoon, a storm rolled across the ridge. The group packed quickly and began their descent, but when they reached the trailhead, Sarah was gone. At first, her friends assumed she had walked ahead. But as night fell and the rain pounded the earth, concern gave way to alarm. By morning, the sheriff organized search parties. For 5 days, men and women scoured the balds, the spruce forests, the rocky slopes. They found her footprints at the edge of the meadow, leading into the fog, and then nothing. Dogs lost the scent near a cluster of boulders. Searchers shouted her name, fired pistols into the air, and left food as bait. No sign came. But then, on the 6th night, 2 volunteers swore they saw her. They were resting near Carver's Gap when a break in the fog revealed a figure on the bald above them. A woman in a pale dress, standing motionless against the storm. They called out, certain it was Sarah. The figure turned, raised one arm, as if beckoning, and then dissolved into the mist. Sarah's body was never recovered. Her family mourned, but rumors quickly grew. Some claimed she had run away, though her belongings were left behind. Others said she had slipped into one of the hidden ravines, her remains lost to time. But hikers began to whisper of strange encounters on Roan. A pale woman glimpsed at dusk, a voice calling their names in the fog, a hand brushing their arm when no one else was near. Over the decades, the sightings piled up. In 1952, a pair of hikers reported being led out of the fog by a woman in white. They followed her lantern light down a side trail, only to realize once they reached safety that no such trail existed on any map. In 1978, a park ranger on patrol claimed he saw a woman standing on Jane Bald in the middle of a lightning storm. When he approached, she vanished, leaving only the smell of ozone in the air. But the most chilling account came in 1994, from a hiker named Daniel Hobbs. Daniel was 35, a father of 2 from Asheville. He had set out to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail that crossed the Roan Balds, planning to camp overnight before descending the next day. The weather, as always on Roan, shifted quickly. By late afternoon, a fog had smothered the ridge, reducing visibility to a few feet. Daniel later told reporters he felt uneasy, as though the mountain had swallowed all sound. The crickets, the birds, even the wind, gone. Around dusk he saw her. She was standing at the far edge of the bald, dressed in pale gray, her hair lifted slightly by the mist. At first, Daniel thought she was another hiker. He called out a greeting, but she didn't respond. Instead, she began to walk slowly toward the tree line. Against his better judgment, Daniel followed, calling louder each time. She moved with strange grace, always just ahead, her figure never fully clear in the fog. Then, she stopped. Daniel swore she turned to face him, her features obscured but her eyes unmistakably bright, reflecting the dim light like an animal's. She raised one hand as though pointing. He glanced in that direction and saw only fog. When he turned back, she was gone. Shaken, Daniel stumbled in the direction she had indicated. Minutes later, he nearly walked off a cliff. He had been steps away from a sheer drop, invisible in the mist. He collapsed, realizing that if he had followed her blindly, he would have died. "I don't know if she was warning me," he said later, "or if she was trying to finish me." Reports like Daniel's have made the Phantom Woman a paradox. To some, she is a guide, appearing when hikers are in danger, leading them toward safety. To others, she is a lure, drawing them off the trail into the fog where the mountain claims them. Rangers remain skeptical, of course. They explain the sightings as tricks of the mist, exhaustion, or the mind's tendency to create figures from shadows. But even among them, there are quiet acknowledgments that something strange lingers on Roan. In 2007, a ranger stationed near Cloudland Hotel ruins confessed during an interview. "We joke about the lady in white, but ask any of us who've worked Roan long enough. We've all seen her, or heard something we can't explain. You get a foggy night up here, and it feels like the mountain is watching you, like you're not alone." Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Phantom Woman legend is the number of disappearances tied to Roan Mountain. Local archives list at least 9 cases of hikers who vanished in the area between 1937 and 2010, their bodies never recovered. Each case shares eerie similarities: sudden fog, last sightings near the Balds, and belongings left neatly behind. Families mourn, searches end, but the mountain never gives answers. Skeptics dismiss the connection as coincidence, but among locals the pattern is clear. They say the Phantom Woman chooses who stays and who goes. To see her is to carry a burden, that you've been noticed, marked somehow by the mountain. Even today, hikers swap fresh tales. In 2019, a pair of college students camping near Round Bald woke at 3 a.m. to find a woman standing at the edge of their firelight. They described her as motionless, pale, her face indistinct. When one of them reached for a flashlight, she dissolved into the fog. Their cell phones, they later discovered, had both died simultaneously despite being fully charged hours before. What then is the truth of the Phantom Woman of Roan Mountain? Is she Sarah Miller, lost to the storm and bound forever to the ridges she loved? Is she an older spirit, one the Cherokee feared long before settlers ever walked these trails? Or is she nothing more than fog and imagination, a legend born of grief and sharpened by the wilderness? Perhaps the answer doesn't matter. For those who've seen her, the experience is real. The silence, the chill, the sense of being guided or hunted. They leave the mountain changed, haunted not only by what they saw, but by what might have happened had they followed just a little farther. If you find yourself on Roan Mountain and the fog closes in, listen carefully. You may hear a voice in the mist, soft and urgent. You may glimpse a pale figure on the Bald, her arm outstretched. Whether she leads you home or into the void, only the mountain decides. For on Roan, the line between safety and disappearance is thin as mist, and sometimes it takes the shape of a woman in white. The Appalachian Mountains are thick with shadows, but there are places where those shadows seem to hold on longer, refusing to lift even when the sun rises. In the small town of Grafton, West Virginia, the mist settles into the valleys and clings to the hollows, and the forests are so dense that sound itself seems swallowed. Locals warn strangers that there are places you don't go after dark, places where the old stories linger like fog, stories of something unnatural that has walked beside the tracks for as long as anyone can remember. Those who've dared to test it out return pale and shaken, while some don't return at all. The Grafton Tunnel itself, constructed in the mid-1800s, is a feat of engineering cut into the side of Cheat Mountain. Trains once thundered through its arched mouth, their whistles echoing across the valleys. Coal miners, loggers, and travelers relied on the line to connect the wilderness of West Virginia with the industrial East. But behind the utility of the tunnel lurked tragedy. Construction accidents, tunnel collapses, and unexplained disappearances marred its history. By the 1900s, locals began whispering about something that lived near the tracks, a pale, hulking figure that avoided the town but haunted the edges of the wilderness. Railroad workers were the first to speak of it. Some called it the Grafton Monster. Others said it was no creature of flesh at all but a ghost, tied forever to the tragedies of the tunnel. Reports varied: a massive, white-skinned figure with no visible head, a shadow that moved against the trees when no wind stirred them, or the unmistakable sound of a train barreling down the tracks long after the line had shut down. For hikers who now wander the Appalachian wilderness near the abandoned line, the warnings remain the same. If you hear the train, don't follow the sound. And if you see the figure, don't run. Running only makes it chase. One of the earliest documented accounts comes from a man named Robert Carver, a track worker in 1915. In his diary, found years later among his belongings, he wrote of nights when the men set down their tools and waited for the night freight. We heard it before we saw it. His words scrawl. The whistle cut the air, long and low, like always. The ground trembled, the lanterns shook in our hands, but the train never came. No light, no smoke, just the sound, passing through the tunnel. Carver described how some of the men ran, certain they'd seen the shape of a locomotive roaring through the darkness, while others claimed a figure stood just beyond the tunnel mouth, broad as two men in white against the black. The next morning, one of the crew was gone. No belongings, no explanation. His tools lay where he had dropped them. He was never found. Nearly a century later, in the 1980s, two hikers named John and Eric, college students exploring abandoned places, decided to camp near the tunnel. Locals told them not to, warning of the monster, but the men laughed it off as folklore. That night, they set up a fire at the edge of the tree line and cracked beers, trading ghost stories with mock bravado. Around midnight, the sound began. The low rumble of steel wheels on tracks, distant at first, then louder. The men cheered, thinking it was an old train still running the line, until they realized something was wrong. The tunnel had been closed for decades. Eric described what happened next in an interview years later. His voice shook even as an older man, still haunted by the memory. "It wasn't just the sound," he said. "It was the pressure, like the ground was alive beneath us. The fire flickered and the air shifted. Then it came, this shape. It wasn't clear at first, just a whiteness, moving low but massive. No head, no face, just body. And it was fast. We ran, but I swear the sound followed us, that whistle screaming through the woods. We didn't stop until dawn. I don't think I've slept right since." When asked what became of John, Eric hesitated. His friend had refused to talk about the encounter, and within a year he dropped out of school and moved away. He cut off contact. Eric believed that whatever they saw had marked them, and John couldn't carry it. The Appalachian wilderness has a way of hiding its secrets, and Grafton is no exception. Hunters report vanishing deer carcasses, tracks pressed deep into the mud that look nothing like any known animal, and the sensation of being watched by something too large, too silent, to be human. One man, a hunter named Travis Bell, spoke. In hushed tones of the night, he followed the tracks too far. "I thought I was on the trail of a buck," he said, "but the prints weren't right. No hooves, no paws, just these round impressions, wide and deep, like the ground itself had given way. I heard the whistle. God help me, I heard it. I dropped my rifle and ran. I ain't been back since." Not all stories end with escape. In 2007, a local high school student named Daniel Price disappeared while hiking near the tunnel. Search and rescue combed the area for weeks, but the only trace they found was his backpack, torn and covered in a fine white residue that no one could identify. His case remains open, a scar on the community. Daniel's mother still speaks of him as if he's alive, refusing to believe he's gone. She's convinced the monster took him, just as it's taken others before. The police dismiss it as folklore, clouding grief, but those who live near the tracks exchange wary glances when his name comes up. Folklorists argue that the Grafton monster is simply another cryptid legend, born of fear and imagination, like Mothman or the Flatwoods Monster. But those who've heard the phantom train or seen the pale shape slipping between the trees are less certain. Some believe it's tied to the violent history of the tunnel, the deaths of workers, the tragedies of derailments, the misery of miners whose lives ended too young. They say the monster isn't a creature but a manifestation of that suffering, a ghost that grew too heavy to stay invisible. One chilling account comes from a retired railroad inspector named Henry Lawson, who returned to the tunnel in the late 1990s out of curiosity. He carried a tape recorder, determined to document the phenomenon for himself. What he captured remains one of the most unsettling pieces of evidence tied to the Grafton monster. The recording begins with Lawson narrating in a calm, steady voice. Crickets chirp in the background. Then, faint at first, a whistle rises. The sound grows, long and piercing, followed by the unmistakable roar of an approaching train. The ground rattles. Lawson mutters that there's no light, no sign of a locomotive. His breathing quickens. Suddenly, there's a crash. The recorder jerks, and a heavy scraping sound fills the tape. The whistle screams one last time, then silence. Lawson was found hours later at the edge of town, disoriented and unable to explain how he'd gotten there. His clothes were torn, and his arms bore long, pale scratches. He never returned to the tunnel. Today, the Grafton Tunnel is a destination for urban explorers, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers, all chasing the legend. Some come back laughing, dismissing it as empty woods and creaking stone. Others return shaken, unwilling to speak of what they've experienced. And every so often, someone doesn't return at all. The tracks lie rusting, half swallowed by earth and vines. The tunnel's mouth gapes like a wound in the hillside, and when the night settles in, when the fog curls low and the world goes quiet, the whistle sometimes sounds again. Some say it's just the wind, playing tricks on the hollows. But for those who know the stories, who've seen the pale figure standing where no human should be, the sound is a warning. Because in Grafton, not every train carries passengers. Some carry something else. And once you hear it, once you feel the ground tremble under your feet, you'll never be sure if you escaped, or if it's still waiting for you, just beyond the tracks. The Appalachian wilderness is full of jagged places where stone juts up like the bones of the earth itself, places that seem older than memory. Few are as striking or as unsettling as Seneca Rocks in West Virginia. Rising nearly 900 feet above the valley floor, the craggy peak splits the sky into sharp edges, a fortress of quartzite that has been a landmark for centuries. Tourists come for the climb and the sweeping views, but those who live nearby know the rocks are more than a scenic wonder. They are a place of warning. Legends cling to Seneca Rocks like mist. The Monongahela people who once moved through these valleys told of spirits that dwelled in the stone, guardians and tricksters who lured the unwary to their deaths. Later settlers spoke of strange lights at night, of voices that carried across the rocks even when no one was there. But the story that has endured most is that of the woman, pale, watchful, and sometimes vengeful, who has been seen wandering the trails and cliffsides for generations. Locals call her the Witch of Seneca Rocks. To dismiss her as superstition is tempting. After all, mountains are dangerous, and disappearances are tragically common. But hikers who've seen her face, who've heard her voice whisper in the dusk, insist there's something unnatural at work. And when the fog comes down the valley, settling heavy over the spruce and laurel, the rocks seem to shift, hiding her until it's too late. One of the earliest recorded accounts dates to the Civil War. In 1863, Union soldiers were stationed near the rocks to monitor Confederate movements through the valley. Corporal Elijah Hart, in a letter to his brother, described the place with unease. "Seneca is no common mountain," he wrote. "At night we hear a woman's cry, though none live nearby. The men jest it is a banshee or mountain witch. Yet last eve, I swear upon my soul, I saw her. A white figure among the cliffs, her hair black as pitch, her face pale and stern. She vanished when called to, though none could climb so quick." Days later, Hart was found dead at the base of the rocks, his skull fractured, his body mangled as if from a fall. His fellow soldiers swore they had not heard him cry out. His death was ruled accidental, but in quiet voices, the men admitted they believed the witch had claimed him. Over a century later, in 1978, a hiker named Margaret Yates vanished while on the trail with her fiancé. The two had been climbing the south face when fog rolled in. Her fiancé later told authorities that Margaret stopped, frozen, staring at the mist. She said someone was calling her, he recalled. A woman's voice. I didn't hear it. I grabbed her hand, tried to pull her along, but she jerked away. The fog swallowed her. She was gone in seconds. Search and rescue scoured the cliffs for 2 weeks, but no trace was found. Not a scrap of clothing, not a broken branch. Margaret's disappearance became one of the most unsettling cases in the region. Some locals whispered that she hadn't fallen at all, but been taken by the witch, lured into the stone itself. Even those who survived the encounter carry scars. In 1996, a pair of rock climbers, college friends named Daniel and Chris, camped overnight at the base of the cliffs. They intended to start early, to beat the heat of the day. But as the night wore on, they heard footsteps circling their tent. At first we thought it was an animal, Daniel later told a journalist. Then we heard the breathing. Slow, steady, like someone standing just outside. Chris called out. No answer. Then a woman's laugh, soft and low. The tent shook. We bolted out with our flashlights, but there was nothing. No tracks, no wind. Just the rocks towering above. The next morning, as they packed, they noticed handprints pressed into the dirt outside the tent. Small, slender, but far too deep, as though something impossibly heavy had leaned close. Not all encounters are malevolent. A ranger named Paul Weston recalled an incident in 2003 when a hiker became lost on the trails after sunset. The man wandered in circles for hours, disoriented by fog. Later, when found, he insisted a woman had guided him. She was dressed in white, the hiker said. Her face was sad, but she smiled at me. She pointed the way back. When I looked again, she was gone. Weston admitted the man seemed genuinely shaken, yet grateful. Still, others wonder if the witch's help comes with a cost. Those who receive it often report years of nightmares, plagued by visions of the cliffs and the woman's piercing eyes. Folklorists debate whether the Witch of Seneca Rocks is a singular spirit or a collection of tales woven together over time. Some suggest she is the ghost of a Monongahela woman who leapt from the cliffs after her lover was killed in battle. Others tie her to the countless settlers and climbers who perished there. The rocks, they argue, absorb grief, replaying it in human form. But skeptics struggle to explain the consistency of the sightings. Always a woman, always pale, always tied to moments of danger or disorientation. She is not just a shadow or a trick of the light. She is a presence, one of the most chilling. Modern accounts comes from 2015, when two sisters, Amy and Laura, visited the rocks during a summer trip. They stayed late, hoping to catch the sunset. As the sky dimmed and the last rays of light slid behind the peaks, they heard singing, soft, lilting, and undeniably human. It was beautiful, Amy said later. Sad but beautiful. We thought someone else was on the trail. But then Laura pointed. There she was, a woman in white standing higher up, her hair blowing though there was no wind. She was looking right at us. The sisters froze. The figure lifted a hand, almost beckoning. The air grew heavy, the trees unnaturally still. Then, just as suddenly, she vanished. Terrified, the sisters ran back to the trailhead. Later that night, in their motel room, Laura woke screaming. She claimed the woman had been standing at the foot of her bed, watching silently. There are those who insist the Witch of Seneca Rocks is not evil, but a guardian. That she appears to warn hikers of storms, falls, or other dangers. But her presence never brings comfort, only dread. And those who see her often find their lives marked in ways they cannot explain. By fear, by dreams, by loss. The rocks remain beautiful, a draw for climbers and travelers alike. But beneath the surface, beneath the photographs and postcards, the legend persists. Rangers still receive reports. Locals still tell their children not to linger after dark. And when the fog drifts low over the valley, curling around the jagged peaks, some swear you can see her there, the pale figure, waiting, watching. Sometimes a savior, sometimes a curse. Either way, Once you've seen the Witch of Seneca Rocks, you never forget her. The Great Smoky Mountains are among the most visited national parks in the United States, drawing millions every year with their mist-shrouded valleys, cascading waterfalls, and endless trails that snake into the wilderness. But beneath the postcard beauty lies a darker truth. These mountains are old, older than memory, older than language, and they have been swallowing people for centuries. Disappearances in the Smokies are so numerous that some locals whisper the mountains themselves are alive, jealous of those who wander too deep. One case in particular still chills residents of both Tennessee and North Carolina. The vanishings of two young boys, decades apart, along nearly the same stretch of trail. To this day, hikers speak of voices in the fog, laughter where no children should be, and strange figures glimpsed between the trees. The story has become known as the Lost Boys of the Smoky Mountains. The first disappearance happened in 1969. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was camping with his family in Cades Cove for Father's Day weekend. A cheerful boy with an adventurous streak, Dennis was playing hide-and-seek with other children in a grassy clearing near Spence Field. His father watched as Dennis darted behind a bush, giggling. But when the other children shouted, "Found you!" moments later, Dennis did not appear. At first, the family assumed he was hiding well. They called his name, combed the nearby brush. Within minutes, panic set in. Rangers were alerted, and within hours, one of the largest search operations in park history was underway. Over 1,000 people scoured the mountains, including Green Berets brought in for their tracking expertise. But the boy had vanished as if into thin air. Witnesses later reported something even stranger. Another family hiking nearby claimed they had seen a bear moving upright through the trees, carrying something over its shoulder. The shape was dark, massive, and silent. Rangers dismissed it, chalking it up to stress and imagination. But others weren't so sure. Despite weeks of searching, no trace of Dennis was ever found. Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing. The case remains unsolved. Years passed. Locals told the story around campfires, warning children never to wander alone in the Smokies. Then, in 1989, 20 years later to the day, another boy disappeared. This time it was 8-year-old Timothy Reed, hiking with his scout troop near the same area. The boys were playing tag along a ridge when fog rolled in, sudden and thick. In the confusion, Timothy was separated. His scoutmaster called out, then blew his whistle. The boys regrouped, but Timothy was gone. The parallels to Dennis Martin's disappearance were impossible to ignore. Once again, search teams combed the area. Once again, dogs lost the scent within yards. And once again, no body was ever found. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered of a feral man, a hermit who lived in the Smokies and stole children. Others said the mountains themselves had claimed them, as offerings or sacrifices. But a handful of searchers reported something they could never explain. The sound of children laughing in the fog, faint but clear, as though carried on the wind. In 2002, a park ranger named David Holloway investigated a strange report from a hiker near Spence Field. The man claimed to have seen a small figure darting between the trees, barefoot, wearing torn clothing. When Holloway checked the area, he found child-sized footprints in the mud, leading into a thicket. The prints stopped abruptly at a patch of moss as if the child had simply vanished. Holloway followed the trail deeper and reported feeling a sudden, suffocating silence. No birdsong, no wind. Then faintly he heard it, laughter, high-pitched, playful, echoing from all directions. He left the woods shaken, unwilling to pursue it further. Folklorists argue that the Lost Boys legends are rooted in the region's older tales. The Cherokee once spoke of the Yunwi-Tsunsdi, or Little People, mischievous, child-sized spirits who could appear and disappear at will. They were said to lure wanderers deeper into the woods, sometimes to protect them, sometimes to trap them forever. The Yunwi-Tsunsdi were feared and respected, and offerings were left at certain stones to appease them. Some locals believe Dennis and Timothy were taken by these spirits, absorbed into the Smokies themselves. The laughter hikers hear in the fog, they say, isn't a trick of the wind. It's the Lost Boys, forever playing, forever unseen. One chilling testimony came from a hiker named Julie Carter in 2011. She and her husband were camping near Clingman's Dome when she woke in the night to the sound of children whispering. At first she thought it was another family nearby, but when she stepped out of the tent, she saw no other camps, only mist curling low across the ground. The whispers were everywhere, she said later. like they were circling us. Then I saw him. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, standing at the tree line. His clothes were old, ragged. His face was pale. He raised a hand like he wanted me to follow. I froze. My husband came out, but when I turned back, the boy was gone. The whispers stopped. The woods were silent. Julie refused to camp in the Smokies again. Another account surfaced in 2016 from a retired Green Beret who had participated in the original Dennis Martin search. Speaking anonymously to a local journalist, he claimed the military team had discovered something they never disclosed to the public, a cave near Spence Field littered with small bones. He insisted they were human, though badly weathered. We were told to keep quiet, he said. Command didn't want hysteria. But I'll never forget the feeling in that cave. Like something was watching us, right behind the dark. No official record of such a discovery exists, but the man's story has circulated widely, adding fuel to the legend. Skeptics insist the disappearances can be explained by natural hazards. Children wander off trails, fall into ravines, or succumb to exposure. The Smokies are vast and bodies can vanish quickly in the undergrowth. Yet even the most pragmatic searchers admit the cases of Dennis and Timothy don't fit the usual patterns. Too sudden, too complete. And then there are the sounds, the laughter, the whispers, that countless hikers have reported. Always in fog, always in the same stretch of wilderness. Today, visitors still hike Spence Field, unaware of its haunted reputation. The grass waves gently, the air carries the scent of spruce and pine. But when the fog rolls in, heavy and cold, the mood shifts. Some hikers quicken their pace, glancing over their shoulders. Others swear they hear it, the faint sound of children playing, somewhere just out of sight. The Park Service dismisses these reports, offering no official comment on the disappearances beyond what's already known. But locals are less hesitant. Around campfires and in low voices at diners, they still tell the tale. 2 boys, decades apart, both vanished into the Smokies without a trace. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the mist drifts across the ridges, their laughter still carries through the trees. The backroads of Appalachia are lined with trees that seem older than time itself. Twisted oaks and towering maples lean across forgotten highways, their branches reaching like fingers into the night sky. But in Randolph County, West Virginia, there is one oak that locals whisper about in hushed tones. Travelers who pass it late at night speak of shadows swaying where no wind blows, of faces glimpsed among the leaves, and of a suffocating heaviness that makes the air almost impossible to breathe. They call it simply the hanging tree. For generations, the tree has been a marker of death. Stories say it was used as a gallows during the Civil War, when deserters and spies were executed without trial. Others claim it was the site of lynchings in the late 1800s, the branches creaking under the weight of bodies left as warnings. Whether born of fact or folklore, the reputation has never faded. Even now, hikers who take the remote trails skirting Randolph County sometimes stumble upon the tree. It rises massive and gnarled, its bark scarred and blackened by lightning strikes. No grass grows beneath it, no birds nest in its branches, and those who linger too long report an overwhelming sense of dread, as though dozens of eyes are watching from the shadows. One of the earliest recorded accounts comes from 1912, when a traveling preacher named Samuel Riggs wrote in his journal about passing the tree at dusk. The sun had dipped and the air was still, he wrote. As I neared the oak, I felt a weight upon my chest. The branches hung low and I saw, God help me, shapes swaying. 10 at least, all in a row, their faces pale in the half-light. I shut my eyes and prayed, and when I opened them, the branches were bare. But the creak of rope lingered in the silence. Riggs refused ever to travel that road again. In 1937, a farmer named Clyde Doherty vanished while walking home from town. His route took him past the hanging tree. Searchers later found his hat and lantern beneath its branches, but no sign of his body. His wife swore she heard him calling outside their farmhouse windows for weeks afterward, his voice thin and ragged. Like he was choking, she said, begging to be cut down. No body was ever found. The most infamous incident tied to the tree happened in 1952. 3 teenagers from Elkins decided to test the legend. They drove to the tree one autumn night, laughing and daring one another to touch its trunk. According to police reports, the car was found abandoned the next morning, headlights still burning. 2 of the boys were discovered miles away, wandering dazed along the road. They claimed they had seen figures hanging from the branches, their eyes open, their tongues swollen. One of the boys swore one of the figures had turned its head to look directly at him. The third boy was never seen again. His parents insisted he would never have run away. The sheriff's department searched the area for weeks, but nothing was ever recovered. His case remains unsolved. Modern hikers sometimes stumble onto the hanging tree without knowing its history. In 1999, a couple named Rachel and David Hughes were hiking a remote trail when they came across the oak. Rachel later told friends she felt an immediate chill. "The whole forest was green and alive," she said. "But under that tree, nothing grew. It was so quiet I couldn't hear the birds anymore." Then I looked up. For a second, I thought I saw people hanging there. Dozens of them swaying. I blinked and the branches were empty. But the ropes, I could still hear them creaking. David, unnerved, urged her to move on. That night, in their tent, Rachel woke to the sound of rope tightening. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow on the canvas wall, long and thin, like a man hanging. She screamed. When David turned on his flashlight, the shadow vanished. Folklorists argue that the hanging tree is an example of place memory, where sites of trauma seem to hold on to the energy of suffering. They compare it to battlefields where ghostly soldiers are seen, or old hospitals where cries still echo. But locals say it's more than memory. They believe the tree hungers, that the spirits of those who died there are trapped, and that they pull others into their ranks. The missing farmer, the lost boy, the countless hikers who vanish without explanation, each, they say, now sways in the branches, waiting for the next traveler to join them. One particularly chilling story comes from 2014. A truck driver named Alan Pierce pulled over near the tree after his rig overheated. It was just after midnight. He stepped out to check the engine when he heard whispering from the woods. "I thought it was the CB radio at first," he said later, "but it was coming from the tree. Dozens of voices whispering all at once. Couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were talking about me. Then I looked up and I saw them. Faces, not one or two, dozens, all staring down, their eyes empty. I don't remember getting back in the cab. I just know I was on the highway again, and the sun was coming up." Pierce quit long-haul trucking within a year. He refused ever to drive through Randolph County again. Skeptics dismiss such stories as the product of fear, isolation, and suggestion. But the number of reports, and the eerily consistent details, are harder to ignore. Always swaying figures. Always the sound of rope. Always the suffocating weight, like being watched by the dead. And there's the matter of the disappearances. Local police files hold more than a dozen missing persons cases tied to hikers and travelers last seen near the tree. None have ever been solved. Today the hanging tree still stands. Its trunk is thick and gnarled, its limbs stretching wide. The bark is scarred by age and lightning, its branches bare more often than not. Travelers who know the legend avoid it, taking longer routes through Randolph County. But curiosity seekers still come, drawn by the morbid thrill of standing beneath its limbs. Some leave shaken, unable to explain the cold they felt or the shadows they glimpsed. Others never make it home. And when the wind is still, when the night is heavy and the air thick, those who dare to pass by swear they hear the creaking of ropes, followed by the faint, choking gasps of voices that should have been silent long ago. Route 16 cuts a lonely path through the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. It winds past coal towns reduced to shells, through forests that seem to breathe with their own life, and across stretches so empty that drivers sometimes go for miles without seeing another soul. To some, it is just another forgotten highway. To others, it is a corridor of strange and terrifying encounters, most famously the story of the vanishing hitchhiker. The legend is one of Appalachia's oldest. Generations of truckers, late-night travelers, and locals have told it in whispered voices. The tale of a young woman who appears along Route 16 on stormy nights. She is always described the same way. Long dark hair plastered against her pale face, a white or light-colored dress soaked through, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she is freezing. She looks desperate, frightened, alone, and she always asks for a ride. But those who stop, those who let her climb into their cars or trucks, never see her reach her destination. The earliest known account dates back to the 1930s, when a miner named Henry Klein was driving home from a late shift. Rain poured in sheets across his windshield, and the wipers barely kept up. On the edge of his headlights, he saw her, a young woman standing by the roadside, dress clinging to her face half hidden by hair. Klein, a father of 3 daughters, pulled over immediately. He offered her a blanket from the back seat and asked where she was headed. She whispered an address in Richwood, just a few miles north. Her voice was soft, almost drowned out by the rain. Klein drove on, glancing occasionally at his shivering passenger. But as he neared Richwood, he noticed the blanket on the seat was empty. She was gone. The door had never opened. The seatbelt, if she had even worn one, still clicked in place. Only the blanket remained, damp with rain. When Klein went to the address she had given, an elderly couple answered the door. Their daughter, they explained, had died in a car crash on Route 16 nearly 10 years before, on a rainy night, wearing a white dress. Stories like Klein's spread quickly. Through the decades, countless others claimed to see her, always on rainy nights, always on that same stretch of Route 16. In 1964, a truck driver named George Mallory filed an official police report after his own encounter. He had picked up a girl matching the description around midnight. She had said nothing during the ride, only sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Mallory tried to make conversation, but she gave no reply. When he stopped at a gas station for fuel, she was gone, vanished without a trace. The station attendant later confirmed that Mallory's rig had pulled in alone. No woman had stepped out. Skeptics chalked up the stories to exhaustion, bad weather, or folklore recycled across generations. But believers pointed to the eerie consistency: her soaked dress, her silence, the way she disappeared without opening a door. And then there were the accidents. Several fatal crashes have occurred along that stretch of Route 16, often under similar circumstances. Survivors, or witnesses, have described swerving to avoid a young woman who appeared suddenly in the middle of the road. But when they staggered from the wreckage, there was never any body found. In 1978, a college student named Mark Wheeler skidded off the road while driving back from a party. His friend, who survived the crash, later testified that Mark had swerved because he thought a woman was standing in the road. The police report noted that no such woman was found at the scene. Wheeler died on impact. By the 1990s, the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker of Route 16 had become a staple of West Virginia folklore. Teenagers dared one another to drive the stretch at night. Amateur ghost hunters set up cameras, hoping to catch her apparition. None succeeded in proving her existence, but the stories only multiplied. One of the most unsettling accounts comes from 2003. A paramedic named Linda Carson was driving home after a long shift when she spotted the girl. Linda later described her as soaked to the bone, teeth chattering, eyes wide like she'd just seen the devil himself. Linda pulled over and offered her a ride. The girl climbed in silently, dripping water onto the seat. Linda tried to reassure her, but the girl only whispered, "He's coming." When Linda asked who she meant, the girl simply repeated it, "He's coming." Moments later, Linda glanced back at the seat, and it was empty. Her uniform was damp from where the girl had sat, but she was gone. Shaken, Linda drove straight to the Richwood police station and filed a report. Officers later told her she was far from the first to describe such an encounter. Some folklorists believe the vanishing hitchhiker represents more than a single ghost. They argue she is a composite spirit, a manifestation of the countless tragedies that have unfolded along Route 16 over the years. Between car crashes, mining accidents, and floods, the area has seen more than its share of death. Perhaps they suggest the spirit is not one girl but many, a reflection of Appalachia's grief and loss. But others disagree. They point to the consistency of her appearance, her behavior, and her location as evidence that she is, in fact, one restless soul. In 2018, a father and son driving home from a fishing trip claimed to encounter her. The father, Jim Reynolds, later recounted that the woman appeared suddenly in his headlights, waving her arms desperately. Jim stopped, thinking she was injured. His son, seated beside him, insisted he saw her too. They offered her a ride. She climbed into the back seat, dripping wet, her dress torn. Jim asked if she was hurt, but she only shook her head. As they neared Richwood, Jim glanced in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. His son turned, wide-eyed, realizing the same thing. They pulled over immediately, searching the road, the ditch, the woods. Nothing. But the seatbelt in the back was still pulled across, as if someone had been buckled in only moments before. Police still receive calls from drivers who claim to see the young woman. Some report pulling over to offer help only to watch her vanish before their eyes. Others describe her stepping into the road, forcing them to swerve dangerously, only for her to disappear in the headlights. Despite its folkloric reputation, Route 16 remains one of the more dangerous highways in the region. Locals whisper that it's not just the winding curves or poor visibility. It's the girl, forever standing in the rain, waiting for another ride that will never take her home. Skeptics continue to dismiss the story as Appalachian superstition, a rural variation of the classic vanishing hitchhiker legend told worldwide. But those who have seen her, those who felt the chill in the air and the weight of her gaze, speak with a conviction that is hard to ignore. They don't believe they saw a story, they believe they saw her. And when the storms roll in across the mountains, when Route 16 shines slick with rain and the night is heavy with fog, many drivers choose alternate routes. Because they know the risk isn't just the road. It's the possibility that a pale young woman might step into their headlights, shivering and desperate, her eyes silently pleading for help. If you stop, she may climb into your car. If you drive past, she may appear ahead of you again. Either way, she will never make it home. And when you glance back at the seat beside you, or in your rearview mirror, you may realize too late that you've given a ride to someone who has been dead for decades.